So good evening, everyone. I hope you are doing well at the end of our second day of our annual gathering. I'm Amy Elizabeth Fox, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Mobius Executive Leadership. And tonight I have the great pleasure and privilege of introducing you to a friend of mine. We were just trying to figure out when we met. We're definitely sure it was at least 25 years ago, and depending on how gray our hair is on a given day, we might say it was 30 years ago. Steve is, I'll read his formal bio, but I'll just start by saying there are very few people in the world that I know who have devoted their life to deep service, like fully, unstoppably, and devotedly. And my dear friend Stephen Hassan is one such person whose compassion is really as wide as the world. So I'm very grateful, Steve, that you agreed to be here and share your pioneering work with all of us. Let me say a little about why I've invited Steve just before I read his biography. One of the things most of us in this room are doing is work that suggests to people that exploring their inner life or cultivating their spiritual development is a worthy thing. I think that's pretty much universally agreed in this room. The dilemma is that most people are not yet discerning consumers of spiritual teachers and spiritual communities and spiritual practices. And so I thought if we think of NPI as a 10-year journey, it's really quite important that somewhere along that journey we pause and study what Steve and others in his field of expertise that he basically created have discovered about what makes the spiritual community safe and how you could know you were entering to work with a teacher who's using mind control. And so I've asked Steve to really describe in detail the hallmark signs of a setting that's cult-like and unsafe and using manipulative techniques to gain followership and submission and costing people their autonomy and dignity and freedom of spirit versus a community, as we aspire to be, of course, where participating in the community unlocks your light and your full possibilities. So, Steve, thank you for guiding us in that discernment. I hope that for those of you that are watching on the internet that this particular talk goes viral because I've seen firsthand very closely with dear friends and the children of dear friends the extraordinary cost of the version where you get absorbed into something that's diabolical and dark. And those cults often do not start out that way, and they are not overtly that way. These are not gullible people who fell for a trick. These are seekers who are genuine in their aspirations and their earnestness of faith and desire to know themselves deeply gets badly, badly manipulated. So thank you, Steve, for your lifetime helping people get out of such contexts and for being the leading theorist in this very precious field that keeps spiritual practice pure of intention and trustworthy and integrous. So, yeah, let's... You're welcome to. We do that a lot around here. So, a little about my dear friend Steve. As I said, Steve is one of the world's foremost experts on mind control, on cults, on destructive organizations and affiliations, and perhaps most importantly, has pioneered a method for deprogramming people who've been in abusive contexts and getting them out and helping them to become free again. He's served as an advisor to family members who are helping to get somebody out of a cult, as a thought leader, as an avid researcher in this domain, as a mental health practitioner, serving clients and families for years. He's devoted his life's work to helping people who have been harmed by such experiences, perhaps very poignantly because he himself had such an experience. He's created the foremost think tank and application center on this topic called the Freedom of Mind Resource Center, a counseling and publishing organization here in Boston. When he finishes his talk, he'll give you the website. Please write it down in case any of your clients ever need this resource. There is nothing else like it. It's the preeminent resource in this topic. He's been a teacher or presenter for medical training programs in Boston, including the Harvard Longwood Psychiatry Residency Training Program affiliated with Harvard Medical School, on Boston University School of Medicine, and on many popular culture programs when there's an incident in the common culture where something gets exposed for having been a cult. Steve is often the commentator they speak about. He's authored 2 important seminal books on this topic, one called Combating Cult Mind Control and one called Freedom of Mind. He's just finished the first ever online course for coaches and therapists on this topic, and it's on his website. To get a link, the website is, we'll put it up at the end, but just to say, www.freedomofmind.com. Please, please give a grateful and enthusiastic welcome to my friend Steve.
What a journey. Thank you so much. So, I grew up in Flushing, Queens, New York, the youngest of 3 kids, 2 older sisters. My dad had a hardware store, my mom was an art teacher, and I was a poetry, creative writing major. And listening to Bill Torbett this morning, I realized I grew up, my next door neighbor was involved with the Gurdjieff Foundation. So I was reading Gurdjieff from age 8, 9, 10, like I read all the books. So, and I wrote about it in Combating Cult Mind Control. But long story short, I was a student at Queens College. My girlfriend dumped me. And I was lonely, and 3 attractive women flirted with me and said they were students, and they were part of a movement of students to make the world a better place. And I remember asking, are you part of a religious community? No, not at all, as they looked me straight in the eyes. My dad had taught me, you can tell if somebody's shifty by their eyes. Not a good criteria in this work. Long story short, because there's so much material I want to go over, I wound up coming to believe that Sun Myung Moon was the Messiah, that the World War III was going to happen in 1977. I should say this was 1974. I was 19 years old. I was recruited the same month that Patty Hearst was abducted by the Symbionese Liberation Army. But my experience was much more an illusion of control, like I thought I was making choices when I wasn't. And dropped out of college, quit my job, was asked to throw out all my original poetry as a symbol of my dedication to God, which I did. They used the Abraham story and asked him to sacrifice Isaac. And I was picked to be a leader of this right-wing fascist cult that still thinks, that democracy is satanic and that a theocracy is what is needed to rule the world. And I was promoted very high up. I had no power, but I got to be in meetings with Moon as I was being hand-groomed to be a top leader in the world of this cult. So I was a fanatic, and I pretty much was convinced, even though I grew up conservative Jewish, not believing in Satan and evil spirits. In fact, I was brought to see the Exorcist movie with 100 other Moonies in 1974, and then we went to Tarrytown, and Moon said, God made the Exorcist. This is a prophecy of what will happen if you leave the Unification Church. And that was my phobia installation, and phobias are a key theme of mind control, which I'll get into in a moment. My family freaked out. Everyone said, Steve, it's a cult. You know, how could you follow him? He's crazy. And I had been trained to do thought stopping and to stay centered on the group. And I was sleeping about 3 to 4 hours a night, working 7 days a week for no pay. It's called labor trafficking these days, but I was volunteering. And I'm going to just jump forward to January 6th because my former cult was there, saying it was Antifa. And I thought, I could have been there if my family hadn't rescued me. Back in '76, after a near-fatal van crash, or I woke up crashing into the back of a tractor-trailer truck at 80 miles an hour, and it took the emergency crews about a half an hour to pry me from the wreckage, and they said I was lucky to be alive. And it really was a near-death experience for me. But what it did was it separated me from the cult, because I was in the hospital for 2 weeks. This is way before cell phones. They gave me a little cassette recording of one of Moon's speeches, but other than that, they visited me once. And so I slept and I ate. My legs were a mess, my chest was a mess. And I called my sister. I broke the rules, and I said, I'm in the hospital. And so she said, you have a nephew you haven't met, come and see him. And I basically said, I'm a leader, so I should be able to get permission to do that as long as you promise not to tell the parents, because they called it a cult, my oldest sister. So I asked her to promise me, and thank God she broke that promise. And I basically was exposed to other ex-members of the cult in a deprogramming. A woman I had recruited into the cult, my spiritual daughter was there, Gladys. And I knew she was a wonderful person, but I was so programmed. I would have killed on command or died on command, and I'm not kidding. I was that fanatical. But because I was that fanatical, I was so sure I wasn't in a cult and I wasn't brainwashed. So when my father begged me to listen, and a tear came out of his eyes, and I had only seen him cry once before when my grandmother passed away, it touched the real me. Even though I was sure he was brainwashed by the communist media. But he said, Steve, how would you feel if it was your son, your only son, who met a group of people, dropped out of school, quit his job, left his family, left his religion? How would you feel? And the tear. And it became a pivotal technique that I teach about changing perspective, right? Because blind faith, you have the cult perspective. But stepping into my father's shoes, I could imagine how worried he was, and I wanted to prove I wasn't brainwashed or mind-controlled. So I said, I'd probably be doing what you're doing now, but I know I'm not in a cult and I'm not brainwashed. What do you want me to do? He said, just listen. Ask questions, and if you want to go back at the end of the week, I'll drive you there myself, but at least your mother and I will be able to sleep at night knowing we did the responsible thing. And so I have so much more material to get through. But being here, I've never been to a Mobius function, and it's like home. Wounded Healer 101. Hearing Eitz Chaim was totally unexpected. I'm going, Eric is a rabbi. Okay, she's doing the thing. Anyway, back to my story. So long story short, I was sure I was doing God's will. The Chinese communists were evil. They were Satan. And so in my deprogramming, I learned some touchstones of how to evaluate brainwashing. And the person who changed my life, who did the ultimate therapeutic reframe, is a very famous psychiatrist named Robert J. Lifton. Has anyone ever heard his name? Phenomenally brilliant man. He wrote a book in 1961 called Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism, and in his famous chapter 22, he outlined 8 criteria. And we went through all 8 criteria, and it was clear that the family did all of those things. I still wasn't open, but it was starting, the tipping point was starting to get to me. And the final break was they handed me one of Moon's speeches to congressmen and senators and asked me what I thought. And this is, I'm telling you my story because it formed my whole approach that I've evolved over 46 years. Lots of evolution, but the basic form of what worked for me is how I unpacked it. In any case, they handed me this thing, and they said, "What do you think?" And it was Moon talking to congressmen and senators, saying how much he loved Americans and respected Americans, and how he's surprised that there are these allegations that he's brainwashing Americans. And I had personally been with him at least 100 times where he dissed Americans and Koreans were the master race, and on and on and on. And it was the first time in 2.5 years I thought, what a liar. And as soon as that happened, it was like plop, 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 plop. Because I realized everything was based on the presupposition that he was the greatest man in human history, he was going to bring peace on earth, he was the Messiah. And I was just cried for 3 hours. So, my survival was trying to use my brain. I had read 2 to 3 books a week prior to the Moonies, read no books other than cult propaganda for 2.5 years. But I just wanted to understand, what is this thing? What happened to me? How could I believe this? Everybody in my family, my community was like, "Steve, you're so independent. You bicycle cross country when you're 16. So anyway, I'm therapeutic reframe. So I call up Robert J. Lifton. He was at Yale at the time. I got him on the phone. I said, "Your book saved my life." He said, "Which book?" I said, "Thought Reform." "That old book? Why?" Now, this is the man who wrote the book on the psychological effects of the nuclear bomb in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. He pioneered psychohistory. He wrote about the protean man, so many things. In any case, I said, "Your book helped me understand my experience with the Moon cult." He said, "Come and tell me. Come and meet with me." So I'm sitting with him, my cast is on, I have crutches still from my accident, and I'm explaining how I was recruited and how I recruited and indoctrinated other people. And he had, his hair, Einsteinian hair and an ascot, and he looked me in the eye, he said, "I only know this secondhand, but you've lived it. They did it to you and you did it to other people. And what you're describing is so much more sophisticated than what I studied. You need to study psychology and explain it to people like me." I was a college dropout, ashamed ex-Moonie, and this psychiatrist was telling me I could actually make lemonade out of this. It's like, whoa. So part of it was wanting to heal myself, and part of it was realizing I really want to make a difference in the world. I really want to make a contribution, and I want to understand what this whole phenomenon was. So I didn't think I'd be spending my whole life at this, and there's a long story of how I got to be where I am, but Jonestown was pivotally important. And politics, but I won't get into that right now. But 46 years I've worked with people in religious cults, therapy cults, political cults, commercial cults, which includes multi-level marketing groups, and trafficking, labor and sex trafficking. In fact, I helped to co-develop the first recovery program for sex trafficking survivors called Ending the Game. Because people would be going back to the pimp and traffickers because they didn't understand brainwashing, how they had been given a new name, a new identity, changed their clothing, etc. I'm doing a lot of one-on-one cults. One person dominating another person, man controlling a woman. Is actually a law in the UK called coercive control, in fact. And I believe California just passed the Coercive Control Act. So let me just move on and say, indeed, Amy, thank you. Freedom of mind is, all the slides you're going to see today are on my website. Go to Freedom of Mind, learn about undue influence. You'll see all these important slides, and I have my course now as well. The freedomfromundueinfluence.org is a nonprofit research entity. And I want to start by saying my observation is most people think it couldn't happen to me. Other people are weak, stupid, gullible, whatever, as Amy was saying in the introduction. And I want to tell you, human beings learn very fast. And we can learn really healthy, good stuff, and really unhealthy stuff, as I just mentioned earlier, about this phobia indoctrination that evil spirits can possess us, etc. So be humble. It can happen to you. It can happen to a loved one. Many people now in the world feel like their loved ones have been radicalized, and they can't talk to them, whether it's QAnon or other conspiracy theories. And I've actually done a lot of work on that, including a TEDx about QAnon, dismantling QAnon. A lot of people think about cults as this big thing, but what's happened with the pandemic is that everything's gone online. Like most undue influence stuff is happening online now. So it doesn't quite, you don't need to be in a isolated physical location anymore. You can have a smartphone and you can be constantly indoctrinated in a bubble, so to speak. But why this is important is if you're ever in a situation where you're coaching or counseling somebody who's been in a group, it really makes a difference if they're a fringe member or if they're a core member or they were a leader. And if they were in for years, they might have gone up and down, in and out. It's very useful to understand that. Most people don't know about the Moonies anymore if they're less than 60 years old, but he is in the Guinness Book of World Records for most marriages at the same time. He did 30,000 couples of true believing followers. The men would be lined up, the women, you and you, you and you, you and you. You had 5 minutes to decide if you accepted God's mission. And he died in 2012. She's taken over. And they're huge. And top officials, including the former president of the United States, has spoken glowingly about Haq Jahan, the wife. But 2 of the sons have defected against the mother. They took a few $1 billion. One has a gun factory, another one has a gun cult. I don't know if you can see, but that's a crown of golden bullets that this guy Sean has, and he has 2 compounds training people to kill. So needless to say, I'm a little nervous about my well-being going forward, but I continue to speak out against the group because they're evil. How many people know that mind control and brainwashing is actually in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association and has been for decades? And I'll just read it really fast. It's considered a dissociative disorder, but it literally talks about individuals subjected to intense coercive persuasion, e.g. brainwashing, thought reform, indoctrination while captive, torture, long-term political imprisonment, recruitment by sects or cult or by terror organizations may present with prolonged changes in and conscious questioning of their identity. So Steve Hassan, poet, Steve Hassan, Mooney, Steve Hassan, son of Milton and Estelle Hassan, Steve Hassan, son of Sun Myung Moon and Hak Ja-han, the true parents of the universe. Steve Hassan post Sun Myung Moon and Hak Ja-han. And when people get out of a mind control experience, you can take the body out, but the programming is still in. And what I'm experiencing for the last 10 years is tons of people who were born into marriages in authoritarian cults are coming out, and they don't know even what's normal or healthy. It's a lot more work to help people. Like for me, I was lucky. I was only in 2.5 years. I had 19 years of solid identity. That said, when I got out, I thought I had a terrible childhood and I was abused. I believed false memories of my childhood. I needed my sisters, my neighbors, my friends to show me videos and tell me, no, Steve, you were happy. We played basketball together. We used to go to concerts, remember? It's like, really? Tell me more. And Robert Lifton also wrote a book on Nazi doctors, because doctors are sworn to preserve life. How could they be with their wife and kids normal and then go to the death camps and do these horrible things? And he called it doubling. But it's a very important concept to think about. This is probably one of the most important slides. Again, it's on my website as a PDF you can download. And I want you to really think about an influence continuum. Let's see, I don't know if people can see this little thing, but anyway, on the left side is constructive, healthy influence, informed consent, respect for your conscience, your authentic identity. You're creative, you can ask critical questions, you can read whatever you want to read, talk to whoever you want to talk to, and if you want to leave, there's no fear, harassment, threats. And on the right side is the authoritarian mind control cults. They create the pseudo-self. So unconditional love, which is what my family raised me with. Conditional love is, we'll love you if you do what we tell you to do. If you don't do what we tell you to do, you'll be punished or shunned, even worse. Compassion, hate. Conscience, internal locus of control. Doctrine, external locus of control. Very important concept. Oops. And then I try to get a lot into one slide. But leaders, healthy leaders know, that's okay, thanks so much, dear. Healthy leaders are human, and they know it, and they're not perfect, and they're not sinless, and they screw up, and they are accountable, and they say, I'm sorry, and they try to make amends. Unhealthy cult leaders, as we'll get into a few slides later, are narcissistic, psychopathic, elitist, power-hungry, and they just want total obedience. And organizations, there really needs to be checks and balances. There needs to be an ability to ask critical questions and get direct answers. When you're in a mind control cult, if you ask the leader a question or one of the people above you, they'll almost always not answer the question, but turn it around and make it your issue. What's the matter, Steve? You don't trust us? Or, Steve, what's the matter? You're not open to Christianity? That was what when I realized the recruiters had lied to me and I was at an isolated workshop, I was like, wait a minute, you said it wasn't religious. What's the matter, Steve? Do you have a problem with Christianity? You closed-minded? So be very clear. Healthy, if it's healthy, it will stand up to scrutiny. And if it's healthy 1 year, it may morph in a bad direction. So don't assume it was healthy 5 years ago and now it's healthy. No, you want to have ongoing informed consent. You want to feel valued for who you are and not have a clone. I was literally told in the Moonies to be a small Sun Myung Moon. think like him, feel like him, walk like him, talk like him. And I did. That's probably why I was elevated so high. Yeah, so ends justify the means. Be careful of any group or person who says, yeah, we need to lie. In the Moonies, it was called heavenly deception. Krishna's transcendental trickery. We need to do it to lift humanity, to overcome bad karma, a million other excuses. But I believe the means create the end. If you're in a group that's lying, you're going to have an ideal world that's lying. And it ain't an ideal world, in my opinion. And you want to be free to leave. If you're not happy, if you're not being fulfilled, if you find a better path, a healthy group will say, good luck, stay in touch, miss you. Unhealthy group, Steve, Satan's going to come after you, Steve. That kind of crap. So, seriously. So I created a model that is now known as the BITE model of authoritarian control, and it wasn't my idea to call it that. It was a minister friend of mine, because when I wrote the book originally in 1988, it was not in any order. He said, if you change the order, you can call it BITE, and then people will remember it. Thanks, buddy. I think I'm going to do that. But the idea is that if a group is controlling your behavior, your information, your thoughts and emotions to make you dependent and obedient and indoctrinating you with an ideology that's all or nothing, good versus evil, us versus them, then it's on the authoritarian, destructive side of the equation. Now, there's literally 20 or so variables under each one. Things like sleep control, food control, need to ask for permission, need for obedience, rigid rules and regulations. So there's literally a checklist that people can go through to anything. And there are lots of ethical, healthy, spiritual organizations that have rigid rules and regulations. You know, take off your shoes when you enter the meditation room. That's pretty rigid, but it also makes sense if you want to think about other people doing well, right? So I'm not going to, for the purpose of having questions and answers, because I really want to get interactive with you, just know the influence continuum and the BITE model. Well, you can apply it to just about anything, and what's so beautiful about it is I don't tell people you're in a mind control cult. I say, here's the criteria, here's the model, check off the list. You tell me. Go back in time. What did you think you were joining or getting involved with? What is it now? If you knew then what you know now, would you have ever joined? People say, no way, and it's time to leave. It's time to reevaluate. So about 8 years ago, I realized that after 40 years of activism, nothing was changing. In fact, things were getting worse. And I realized the law itself is out of date about 100 years with what we know about neuroscience and social psychology and such. And I got involved with this program in psychiatry and the law at Harvard Medical School. And I did a presentation for them. And these preeminent psychiatrists, psychologists, and lawyers said, Steve, this is really important. And one of the professors says, you need to get a doctorate. And I said, I'm 63. And he said, I'm 77. But if you want to change the law, you need to do a quantitative study on your model, telling us that it works and you've helped people for decades. It doesn't cut it in courts of law. So I got talked into going to fielding. It was a fantastic experience. And I become an academic, and all of a sudden people take me a lot more seriously. Instead of being an ex-Moonie, now I'm a scholar practitioner. But I've taken a lot of crap from people because I was in the Moonies, so why should I listen to him? Anyway. So what I did was I took all the major models of brainwashing, I added the bite model and the influence continuum, and what is illegal is trafficking internationally, fraud, force, or coercion. It's not all three. You can have fraud and coercion. And the bite model is coercion. In fact, labor trafficking experts use my model now, and sex trafficking experts use this model now. And I also added, I'm going to skip ahead. I just want to do one thing, and then I come back. So I added this law professor emeritus, Alan Shefflin's model, because this is the model for expert witnesses, right? If you want to convince a judge or jury, right? You need to have a model to explain how to think about undue influence. So if you think about the influencee and their vulnerabilities, influencer, the predator, the predatory organization, status difference, somebody's a minister or a professor or president. There's a little bit of an imbalance there, and these techniques. So there's actually a framework that can be used to present in a court of law how to think about a particular abuse situation. And I also want to come back to Nexium, Keith Raniere, and The Vow, which has now started its second season. But he was put in jail for trafficking, not for mind control. They didn't want to go into that territory, but they were talking about fraud, force, and coercion. And women were being branded near their genitals in that horrible cult that I've actually known a lot about. These two slides are really important. These are also on my website. And I want to credit Eric Fromm. I apologize. I should have his name up there. He came up with the concept of malignant narcissism. So narcissism is on a continuum. Some people can be very self-absorbed, but still have empathy. The malignant stuff, which we'll get into a second, grandiose self-centered behavior. This is regular narcissism on a continuum. Fantasies of power, success and attractiveness, need for praise and admiration, sense of entitlement, lack of empathy. But here's the danger, really dangerous stuff with cult leaders, is they think they're above the law. They think nothing of being a pathological liar. They're exploitative, they're sadistic, they're harassing, they're threatening, they're violent, they're paranoid, they can't trust anybody. Everything's transactional. This is the stereotypical profile of all predators and cult leaders. If you understand these two slides, you can save yourself and your friends and your family members and your kids a lot of pain to have them look out for these qualities. Very, very destructive. I'm going to scooch. So part of my journey, I read everything I could get my hands on about brainwashing, thought reform, persuasion, attitude change, social psychology. Something was missing. And in 1980, a social worker friend of mine said, "Hey, I'm going to a hypnosis workshop. You want to come with me?" Who is it? Richard Bandler. He's teaching neuro-linguistic programming. Now, this was 4 years after I had left the Moonies, and I was petrified to go to any workshop. Still petrified, but I love to learn. I'm really curious. So I went to this program, and I was pacing in the back of the room the whole time. But I was watching and listening to what he was doing up front, and I was like, I used to do that when I was a Moonie leader. I used to talk that way in very specific ways. Blah, blah. I'm not going to do more. But it opened up a whole doorway for me to understand states of consciousness and trance states. And what I want, I realize I put too many things on one slide, but what I want people to understand is that human beings go in and out of trance all day long. This is not a unique phenomenon. And of course we sleep at night as well. But the word hypnosis is not sleep. It's really a heightened state of concentration to the point of exclusion of other things. And the most important thing is you're more vulnerable to suggestion in that state, which speaks to how important it is to vet whoever you're going to be listening to, who's going to be doing hypnosis with you. And there's a ton of people who take these workshops and they get a certificate, and they're not mental health professionals, they're not been trained. And in my opinion, it's very dangerous. I'm definitely biased and think you should go to a clinical mental health professional who's licensed, who has checks and balances on them. Not to say that licensed therapists can't be abusive too. But who's seen the Social Dilemma movie?
Here's the Social Dilemma.
Oop. Thanks. So Tristan Harris and Asa Raskin have a nonprofit called the Center for Humane Technology, and basically he interviewed all these executives from top social media firms, and they talked about how intentionally addictive they've made the platforms because they can make more money by selling advertising. And Tristan actually interviewed a hypnotist, and I was interviewed by him as well. And think about, what is doom scrolling, right? You go on your phone, you're going to check for 5 minutes, and 2 hours later, you're like, what happened? That's called time distortion, by the way, in hypnotic language. And I want to be clear, hypnosis can be incredibly powerful and wonderful. When I was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma and I needed surgery and 3 months of chemo and radiation, I saw a clinical hypnotist, and it eased my anxiety. It helped me sleep at night. And I had miraculous experiences because I was engaging the full power of my mind and spirit to my own healing. And it's a tool that I use to this day, where I will even record a trance for myself, put it on an iPod, and put the earbuds in, and empower me to finish a dissertation, even though I'm scared shitless. And I literally, before I came in this room, was asked to be interviewed about some videos that are on YouTube of hypnotic inductions, very unhealthy hypnotic stuff that's online. Young people are not taught what to watch out for, and this stuff is coming at our minds. It's very upsetting. So I'm going to move forward. That's the end of the presentation. Just to keep in mind, influence is everywhere. And are you feeling in your body, in the here and now, with the locus of control in you, where you're not deferring all your personal power to somebody else or to some other group, where you understand how the mind works? And I'll share a very important thing that I learned many decades ago, which is, do you know what the difference between an associated and a dissociated memory is? Just no? So you've heard about PTSD? So what happens with PTSD is some cue or trigger happens, and the person goes back in time into the traumatic incident in an associated way. So they're re-traumatized. They're reliving the trauma. What I teach my clients is, hey, it's your mind. You should control it. You shouldn't be controlled by thoughts or feelings or past experiences, because we only have the now. So I encourage them to make a little window and see the younger them having the trauma. They're safe in the here and now. And I have them identify what are the triggers, and I teach them to reprogram the triggers. The mind, you can do a lot with your mind. I'll give you a quick example with me. When I got out of the cult and somebody said, hey, did you see the moon last night? I'd be kneeling in front of the fat Korean billionaire. I didn't want to be back in my mind as a Moonie. And I had to go, how do I undo this? And I had to think, before the Moonies, if someone said, did you see the moon last night? I would see the satellite going around, right? So I would deliberately then use the word moon and picture the moon. Half moon, full moon, quarter moon, blue moon. And humans can reprogram their own minds really fast if you understand the techniques. And that's the essence of my work, is I want to empower people to heal themselves. I want to empower people to go back in their cult experience, take out the goodies, because there always are some good things that happen despite all the bad stuff, and exit counsel themselves or deprogram themselves. And it works. But the key is you have to be in your body, right? Because remember, it was a dissociative disorder. Separation. You want to be embodied. You want to be an embodied mind, right? Very important, because you want to listen to your body also. Ton of people in mind control cults have psychosomatic illnesses. Surprise, surprise. Asthma, migraines, backaches, skin disorders, etc. They get out of the cult and they understand. It was their unconscious saying, get out of there. Get out. Listen to your gut. And I often ask people, go back, what was your first feeling when you heard about the group or you met the guru? And almost always people say, oh, I thought he was crazy, or I thought he was dangerous, or I thought it was a cult. But they didn't listen. And I say, if it's legitimate, it will stand up to scrutiny. I have one more story, and then we'll do questions and answers. When I first got back from my first workshop, my mother said, you look like you're on drugs. Did they give you drugs? And I'm like, I don't think so. I hadn't slept for 3 days, but they didn't give me drugs. And my mother said, let's go talk to the rabbi. Sure, I'll talk to the rabbi. But they had put in my mind the idea that the world was coming to an end and had a chance of building the Garden of Eden on earth. So I met with the rabbi, had never heard of the Moonies, and he thought I wanted to become a Christian. And he didn't answer what I was there for. What he should have said is, Steve, I've never heard of this group, but I can assure you, if it's legitimate, it will stand up to scrutiny. Promise me you're not going to go back or be in touch with them for a few weeks, and let's research it together. And these days, this was way before Google, these days you can take the name of the group in quotes, the name of the leader in quotes, plus cult, plus brainwashing. Don't settle for the first 10 hits, because the big cults all are controlling the search engine optimization things. Go in. And now you know me, so you can contact me. Hey, Steve, you ever hear of blah, blah, blah? And I hear all the time about splinter groups of other cults, too, because groups will change their names all the time, right? So, but if you look at a website, if they're not saying the credentials of the person, their history, and being honest, don't spend your time, your energy, or your money. Like, move on. Be a good consumer, right? So with that, I'm just going to say, if you want to read a single book, start with Combating. I bought the rights back in 2014 because the old book was pre-internet, and everything changed with the internet, really. I had to change the whole modality of how I can help people. And essentially, the second book, Freedom of Mind, is all about using complex systems to get family, friends, ex-members, and other resource people together as a team. And the goal is to ethically influence the person in the cult by asking questions and encouraging them to think and reflect and to reality test, not to persuade them with facts. That doesn't work. In fact, any direct attack on the leader, the doctrine, or the organizational policy will activate the cult identity that's been trained to defend. But people don't want to be abused or mind controlled. They want to be free, and they can feel genuine love versus I'll love you for now until you don't do what I tell you to do, and then I'm going to yell at you and scream at you and tell you to take a cold shower. So with that, I want to end and ask and answer questions. I want to thank you all profoundly, and I'm having a great experience here. Oh, I want to say one other thing. Somebody in my track said, Steve, what'd you think of the chanting and the dancing this morning? I said, I loved it. He said, wasn't it kind of culty? And I whipped out, and I explained, you know, it's fun to have fun. It's good to have exercise. But for people who are ex-cult members who haven't worked through their stuff, trigger alert, isn't this reminding me of what happened to me whenever? And that's, you know, so that just gives you an indicator to do some more work. So with that, I am going to wrap it up, and thank you. And take questions. Thank you. So we have microphones. Sir, do you want to go first?
Sure, thank you, Steve. That was really enlightening. How would you recommend to a person that had been born into
Great question.
Get deprogrammed?
So it's a great question. In my course, I actually highlight that there are a lot of people who are born into cults who are coming out now versus me being recruited in as an adult. In fact, I have a podcast called The Influence Continuum, and a few weeks ago I interviewed a woman named Daniela Young, who was raised in one of the worst cults I've ever worked with, the Children of God. It was run by a pedophile. They were raping little children and sending women out to be happy hookers for Jesus. And kids didn't get to be with their own parents. Some of them didn't even know who their father was. She got out, ran away at 15, joined the military, became an army captain of intelligence, was in Afghanistan, and then had a total meltdown because she was like, I'm in another cult. So she wrote this book. It's a great book called Uncultured. But to answer your question, the people who, there's now communities of other ex-members. So but you also want to make sure that you're with healthier people than you. I should also say I'm part of a collective of ex-members. We're trying to do a hashtag I Got Out movement to kind of mirror the Me Too movement. Well, I got out to create destigmatize and to create a pathway for people who've been radicalized, especially in the last 5, 6 years, 7 years, that, hey, we did what we did believing genuinely that we were doing a good thing, and there's life after cult, basically. And I'll just say, I could go on, but I'll just say people who are born in cults don't know what's normal. And so they need to be taught that. I'm going to come back, forgive me, to one other point that's worth saying. If you look at the ethical side, parenting, healthy parenting, the parents recognize each child as a unique soul, a unique person, and their job is to help them to grow up and individuate and figure out their own way, whereas authoritarian families want obedience, want the kids to believe what the parents believe, et cetera, et cetera. Healthy is appropriate developmental parenting, where you allow the kids to make mistakes and learn from it, et cetera. And this is, corporal punishment is one of the worst traumas on young children. There's a lot of research now against corporal punishment. Next question, anyone? Sir.
I'll just speak loud. No, it works. Okay. Hey, maybe an awkward question, but a lot of the techniques you mentioned have been used here to obviously negatively influence people. Yeah? Is there anything in your experience where you can use this for positive change?
1,000%.
1,000.
1,000%. So I think depends on how long I'm around on Earth, but I'd love to apply what I've learned to people who've been traumatized in childhood, drug addicts in jails, and they have this convict identity, to teach them how to make a healthy identity. And I want to do a shout out to one of my teachers over the decades. He passed away this year. His name is Daniel P. Brown. He was one of the world's forensic top psychologist. He's also a Tibetan Buddhist master who's translated at the request of the Dalai Lama all the secret high-level Tibetan Buddhist teachings. And he taught me an attachment repair protocol using hypnosis in an ethical way, and it's incredibly simple, and I offer this in memory of him because he came up with it. But it's about capitalizing on neuroplasticity and neurogenesis, right? You know that we can rewire our own brains. And it's an attachment repair protocol where you ask the person to go back to early traumatic events in their life. And here it is, drum roll. Imagine the ideal mother and ideal father uniquely suited to you and what you would have wanted them to say and do. I'll give you an example to flesh it out. So in my training with him, he showed a video of a piece of work he did with a woman who had, at age 8, had had a nightmare and screamed out. And her parents yelled at her, "Shut the F up or we'll come in and beat the crap out of you." And Dan said, imagine you had this nightmare and the ideal mother and the ideal father uniquely suited to your personality was there. What would you have wanted them to say or do? And this woman just generated the most beautiful repair. Oh, they would immediately come in. My mom would turn on the light, sit on the bedside, hug me, say, "Oh, honey, it's just a nightmare." My dad would sit at the base of my bed, "Honey, I'm here too." My mom would rock me and hum to me. I'd ask my dad, he'd go to the kitchen and warm some milk and bring chocolate chip cookies until I come back, till I was ready to go to sleep. And then they would kiss me and turn out the light. And people, I'm telling you, people generate the most brilliant healing experiences for themselves if they understand this simple thing. Now, people know what historically actually happened. It's not like you're doing anything unethical, but you're teaching the person to create healthy mother and father introjects that are like, "Go, Steve. Good job, Steve." And it's brilliant, and it works. And it actually, I'm told, I haven't seen any data specifically on it, but I'm told it fixes personality disorders. The problem is somebody with a personality disorder has to do this And the in-person relational piece with the therapist is also very important, to have a authority figure in real life, and it's not just imagining it. Next question, yes? Oh, darn. I want to go to 6:15. Please, no? Please, I really, go ahead. I got 15 minutes, yay. Thanks for being flexible.
I'm curious to hear about the cult leader. In how far are they? Do they have a checklist, or is the cult created because of their personality? I mean, how much are they? Let's ensure we're doing this.
I think I get it. So I've been asked that question a few times in the last 46 years. Most people think cult leaders are con artists that just want power, sex, and money. They definitely want all of those things. But most of them were in a cult, or they were abused themselves. So it's very interesting. Most people who've been raped don't become rapists. Very small percentage, and a very small percentage of people become cult leaders who leave cults. But I'll also tell you that Jim Jones used 1984 as a guide. Like, there's copycatism amongst different cults. So the Moonies were selling flowers by the roadside. The Krishnas started selling flowers by the roadside because power, money, sex. So there's that part of it. Did that answer your question?
It's more how conscious are they of doing to you what was done to you? Are they purposefully manipulating?
So they believe that they are ordained to do whatever they feel like doing because they surround themselves with yes people, and they need the yes people for their narcissistic supply. And so a cult leader rarely gets feedback from ex-members. Keith Raniere got it in his trial, big time. He's got a 120-year sentence for trafficking, Keith Raniere, thanks to courageous family members and former members who, just said, branding women, not okay. And that opened the door to a whole new reevaluation. I should also say that NXIVM used NLP. Nancy Salzman was trained by Todd Epstein in NLP. And Mark Vicente, who is the filmmaker for them, that's part of The Vow on HBO. You can actually see Keith Raniere doing hypnotic double binds, embedded commands. And people would meet with Keith Raniere for 2-3 hours and not have a single memory of what happened. It's called amnesia. And perpetrators like to use that to cover their terrible things. I'll come to you next. Yes, sir. And her after, and then you. Go ahead.
A lot of your examples are the individual restorative processes. But I'm wondering about group restorative processes. I mean, where you get to, tackle, let's say, or is there a way to tackle big chunks of a cult rather than just, one by one, waiting for people to come out? Have you seen that?
What came to mind was Amrit Desai and Kripalu when it came out that he was, having sex even though he claimed to be celibate or whatever. I forget the whole story with him. Then they brought in external people, made a new board. They kicked him out. They did a very ethical cleanse within it. Usually it's a cult leader dies and didn't designate an heir. So when the head of the Krishna cult left, I think there were 11 or 12 gurus who each set up their own cult version of it. But people have been asking me for years, how do we de-radicalize at scale And I have a lot of ideas, but it would take an army and a lot of resources to do. But I think I know how to do it. It's basically mass education. It's complex systems. It's educating family members and friends of these cult leaders and billionaires as well. There's a lot of cult stuff happening in billionaires. You are next.
In your opinion, is Donald Trump a cult leader?
Am I allowed to answer?
Please.
Yes.
Okay.
Malignant narcissist par excellence.
So just to follow up on his question, so now we have mass media and media companies and whole societies, whole parts of our society that are following. And so we're in an incredible crisis.
Yes. So being respectful, not to make this political, I'll just say that 40 million Americans who are mischaracterized in the media as white evangelical Christians are actually in mind control cults, from my perspective, called New Apostolic Reformation. They're mega churches. The leader says, I'm an apostle, or I'm a prophet, and I get direct revelations from God. So, and they do bite model control over their members and persuade them Satan is going to invade them. They claim they can exorcise demons, etc. And this is a very potent force. 40 million Americans and an estimated 650 million people around the world in these NAR groups. I've done podcasts on it and blogs, including interviewing a former pastor of one of these groups. Mind control is real, and what I want to say is you need to learn what's out there, and you need to learn how to control your own mind, be a good consumer. And I really do believe in spirit. I really could never have done this work for 46 years if I didn't feel God wants me to do this. As many times as I burned out and I'm done, it's like there's too much more work to do. So I'm still at it. Yes, back. Oh, okay.
You must be a massive irritant to cults, so I'm interested if you're being targeted by them as well, and if they choose to ignore you. And associated with that is my question: do you feel like a man with a lonely voice, or is your work over the last 46 years embedded in an increasing network of charities, other work of peers who do that? Because I hear a lot tonight about your podcast, and you're a strong voice with a gramophone, but I'm curious if you feel supported and embedded in a growing movement that supports this fantastic work that you do.
So it's a complex question. I would say that I get a lot of satisfaction that some of the top mental health professionals who are working in this space were helped by me 20, 30 years ago. So that gives me a lot of gratification. That said, we're not getting the resources that we really should have. And so I just decided to just keep generating a lot of content and try to get the word out. And really, a lot of people will say, have you ever been in a cult? No. Multi-level marketing group? Oh yeah, just a year in college. Or, I did have that controlling girlfriend for 3 years that isolated me from my family. And so if they start connecting the dots, this is part of the whole phenomena that helps. But billionaires who want to keep pushing that we need oil and coal and keep fossil fuels going. They want distraction and they want to undermine and buy off politicians. And it's very, very frustrating on that level as well. And we just need more activists. And I look at this organization as a wonderful gift to create more conscious people who want to make things better and contribute And so thank you for all your good work, and Erica as well. Thank you.